Alright guys, TacticalRab here again. I hope you're doing that and enjoying your day so far. Emergency video this evening with Rostermania continuing to go down. One weekend into the qualifiers and one weekend where OpTic absolutely smashed Vancouver Surge. They're making a roster change. That's the big rumour of the day, that MercuLes, after the big discussion after Major 3 that Merc in for Skyz made a fair bit of sense. OpTic decided not to do that and it seemed to be working out. But here we are today with major rumours that indeed, despite some delays for interesting reasons we'll get into, they have now apparently executed on this change. Why? How? What's going on? Is this a good decision after they looked much better a couple of days ago? Despite all of the community discussion around this over the last few days, OpTic continue to do OpTic things. Very much intrigued to your thoughts and comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. Let's get into it. I wanted to start here because roster changes are a theme of the day, and there's been lots of discussion even from Ronnie before he broke today's news about Envy potentially coming back into the HyDra scene. It's been a big discussion lately because OpTic, of course, they merged with Envy a couple of years ago. Envy effectively ceased to exist. Now the ownership group behind Envy is obviously partnered with OpTic now as it was, but HyDra was able to, in the same way that Hex was able to extract the OpTic ownership from that Immortals situation that broke down at the end of OW19, HyDra was able to get the Envy brand back, and now he's deploying into several esports. I think they've partnered with Native as an organization to start making that happen, and apparently they're getting involved in HyDra as well. Of course, HyDra is going to be there at the DreamHack events coming up in a few days' time, in addition to all the Call of Duty stuff, so that is going to be fascinating, and it's kind of in conjunction, really, Envy getting back into HyDra, Dallas Empire tweeting out about retweet if you missed us a few days ago. You know, understandably, there's lots to talk about. Hang on a second here. Are Envy going to get back into the CDL? Couple of options for them. Ravens and Boston are the two teams that we expect, if push came to shove, would sell. Of course, Gorillas have kind of been sold, but Gentlemates missed the deadline to fully rebrand, so it's kind of Los Angeles Gorillas, Gentlemates for now, whatever. But Boston and Ravens, we think that if the right number was presented, they would probably sell their spot, but we think if they are going to sell the spot, it's likely to be to maybe Al-Qadsia Esports or Twisted Minds, a couple of the Saudi teams that might be looking to get involved. So Envy, who knows? Look, HyDra isn't going to try and come back into COD and waste money. He's probably not going to do all that much in challenges, I wouldn't imagine. You know, like Omit and Team Notorious and other great organizations running the show down there. If Envy come in, you know, are they going to commit that kind of capital to what is clearly a difficult ecosystem to make money in Tier 2? Probably not. I imagine HyDra would wait for the right opportunity in Tier 1 to see how it goes, but just something to keep an eye on. But today, we started to get the situation hitting the timeline. Beans, first of all, was pretty spicy because, of course, Beans on that Toronto team, there were big questions after the major in Miami whether they potentially were going to blow up the Toronto team. Not blow it up exactly, right? But, you know, bench Beans, bring in MercuLes. They had a good event with him, but at the end of the day, they came third with Merc. They'd come third the previous event with Beans. There was a feeling, I think for many, certainly including myself, that with Beans, with the team they'd prepped for, they could maybe have gone all the way or certainly made it to the finals. So I think the decision that they've made seems sensible enough, and they've hit the ground running again in the qualifiers. Beans hasn't been spectacular, but, you know, they're 2-0 in the qualifiers, looking perfectly reasonable as they have done as of late. But Beans says, let's get ready to rumble, baby. And then we start getting stuff like this. Zuma comes out and says, I've got some things to deal with, doing the best that I can. We may see some Rostermania here. And then the flanks say, there's a show coming soon. We've got Breaking Point saying, and here we go. We've got Breaking Point then tweeting this out, which, of course, definitely turned some eyeballs. We had Ghosty in the reply to this saying, like, you know, damn, I might have found out like this, I'm getting dropped and all this stuff. And then JoeDeceives tweets out the green wall. So, yeah, it was becoming increasingly clear that there was potentially something serious happening here this evening. And look, as I'm recording this video, this has not been made official or officially confirmed, but according to our understanding, this is what's going on. Skyz is getting benched from the OpTic starting lineup, and MercuLes is going to come in to replace him. So, I mean, here we go, baby. Look, I did talk about it. I'm not going to lie. We talked about it after the major when OpTic decided to stick to say, look, if they still wanted to make the change, there's not necessarily anything stopping them. It's just, if they were going to make the move, they'd just placed top 8 at the major. You'd have thought that would have been the time to do so. They decided to stick it out for the time being, and it was the feeling of many, including, let's not forget, Shotzzy himself, who famously at the start of the season said, Pred ain't ever coming back. He came back and then said a few days ago, Skyz ain't going anywhere. We're sticking with our roster. This is the roster till the end of the year, I think he said, towards the end of March. And, well, I mean, how times move on rather swiftly, certainly when it comes to OpTic, right? There's always some chaos with this organization. Whenever the news cycle calms down just that little bit, you always know that OpTic are going to spice it up with some sort of chaos. And here we are again. So there's so much to say about this, first of all. I think the main thing is, well, hang on a second, why now? Rather than not doing so before, especially when they played pretty damn well just a few days ago. That is the very confusing thing for many, but Ronnie, he drops the article today. You know, he mentioned this earlier that he'd heard it from a couple of sources that, yeah, this is probably going to be happening, and it seems like now it's the time to do it. And Shotzzy is on the thumbnail here for probably a very good reason indeed. Here we go again with the Warlord making some serious decisions. So this is the article that he comes out with. Probably better, you know, drop a little reaction on this. Maybe we'll put the little Shotzzy emoji on there. Maybe pick up 10 bread on the site. But yeah, OpTic are planning a change just a few days after delivering their most impressive win since Stage 1, finally beating a team that's actually going to champs in the Surge. It seems that they are going to do this. However, given the team's recent performance over the weekend, the timing of the move raises questions. The team has consistently discussed how practice has been going well, but translating that success into matches has been a challenge. Seems like they finally found the rhythm. Karma was on stream saying, yeah, don't know what happened there, lightning in a bottle, we can do so again. Finally, we've shown the potential in matches that we'd shown in practice. And Surge, they're no slouches. They just went Game 5 a couple of series ago against FaZe, and then they came top 2 at the second major, top 2 at the third major. Yeah, online cards, there's always talk about, well, Surge are playing for Vancouver, they're playing on cable. It's not ideal, sure, and they'll make that point very much known. But still, OpTic absolutely smashed them and seemed to be bringing so much more energy into that series than we had seen previously. So they confirm that MercuLes, whatever, MercuLes, a slight misspelling there, but all good, had previously turned down an offer from Cloud9 New York over a week ago following his impressive performance. So we know that Cloud9 said, you know, hey, we're interested. And we mentioned that a few days ago, right, that MercuLes had the Cloud9 offer if he wanted it. And to me, it was very understandable why you would say no in that situation. The offer apparently wasn't great in terms of terms, money, and it would lock you down in a position where if anyone else wanted you, there's then, of course, buyouts to potentially negotiate, which may not be ideal. And there's also the Toronto substitute option, which could have been another possibility as well. But no, MercuLes decided to hold off, see how things went, and it's likely going to work out spectacularly well for him. I mean, there isn't much better than this. You play one tournament, you got a last-minute opportunity to sub in, and here you are potentially playing for the biggest org in COD. Rumour has it, Dashy, MercuLes, Huke, Shotzzy, that is going to be the team of 4. And, I mean, first of all, how has it got to this point? It was only a few days ago when Shotzzy was saying, look, this is our roster, we're going to stick it out with the team, and this is going to be what it is until the end of the season. The first thing to mention probably on Skyz, right? Because Skyz, when he joined this team, did any of us expect him to still be on the roster next year? No, I didn't, right? Like, Skyz, personally, look, he's been a great player in his career. Hopefully he continues to go on and, you know, achieve good things, potentially have another good team in the future. Skyz, I do think in terms of his entire career as a player, is actually quite underrated. Like, he was really, really good a few years ago, and the last couple of years he's not been quite so strong, but look, he's a world champion at the end of the day, and I don't think that OpTic's decision to sign him was necessarily terrible. It was just, to me, very clearly not going to be a long-term solution. I mean, Dashy and Skyz on the ARs was never really going to work long-term, in my opinion. Now, could Skyz, in theory, be a reasonably good, you know, gap filler? Sure. I mean, he was meant to improve their search. Did he really? No. So I think Skyz leaving OpTic was an inevitability, but I did think that it would happen, you know, further down the line, probably in the off-season, after it certainly looked like they were going to stick it out with their team. And I told you guys the other day that I didn't necessarily hate the decision to stick it out. You know, I can understand the logic behind it. And then they played last weekend, they played Surge, and they just battered them about 3-0 without really any difficulties. Skyz had his best series of the entire year with a 1.24. So Skyz must be, well, if I'm Skyz, I'm rather confused and frustrated and probably pretty angry this evening because I got a second here, right? Just played the major, came top 8, but then, you know, you tell me we're sticking. Okay, great, I'm sticking it out. Grinding, talking with the boys just the other day on stream. We literally mentioned this morning, Skyz and Shotzzy in the same call, having a chat about things on the weekends. Seemed like it was all going rather well. And then after this good performance, Skyz is then going to be dropped off the team, it seems, regardless. Now, the opportunity to sign MercuLes potentially, if you don't take it now, you may never get the opportunity, right? Obviously, with Merc, there's been talk about, obviously, Toronto, but also the Saudi teams, right? You've got to think about it. MercuLes, what he did at Major 3, you're never going to get an opportunity that good again if you're a player. I mean, really any player, like super blessed to get the chance to step in terms of your exact role you wanted to play in Beans' position on the flex. Run both guns incredibly impressively well, show exactly what your capabilities are, dominate, frankly, some of the maps that you played, barely have a bad map or series the entire weekend, and also got to play with the Toronto core, which is incredibly strong and made Merc look super at home, but also Merc elevated that team in some sense as well with the slang that he was delivering on the map. So, you know, both ways I think it was impressive for Toronto and for MercuLes, but opportunities like that, they don't come along very often and for very few players. I mean, even Ghosty, when he was signed to OpTic a couple of years ago, he didn't have an event like this, he did it in challenges, and OpTic were like, well, yeah, okay, we'll give it a go, given their team was a shambles. The Ghosty situation, I thought would have probably proved to OpTic to say, look, it's worth taking the risk on MercuLes. And I think now that's the big discussion. When they did decide to stick it out, didn't massively hate it, but still, if I was OpTic and, you know, I had the resources, because there was also a theory that maybe Hector, you know, obviously just speculation, right? But, you know, people were theorizing that maybe Hex said, look, guys, you've had your chances this year, let's just run it down and see what happens in the off-season. But as I say, MercuLes seemed like such a prospect, such a talent, that to not take advantage of the opportunity now while you have it, especially after what happened with Ghosty a couple of years ago, seems like an error. But then they did stick it out. They had clearly a great result, maybe a great week of practice, and now you're thinking, well, they're bringing in MercuLes and they've just wasted another week of practice. And for what? With only 2 more weekends of qualifiers, Champs is looming, and maybe there was a feeling that they were didn't want to take a risk on a new team because then it might destabilize their run to Champs, whatever the case is. Octane, though, said that they were meant to pick him up sooner, but there was something that delayed it, and there was some discussion as to what. We'll probably end up talking about this in more detail tomorrow, but the theory was, okay, maybe it's contract stuff, right, they had to negotiate a buyout or whatever, right, with Omid, who knows. But Gaza says, you know, he knows some people in the scene, he says false, that's not true, and I don't know where this information is coming from, but let's just talk about it, that the rumor is that Shotzzy wanted to make the change. Shotzzy, he wanted to pull the trigger. The Warlord wanted to make it happen, but there was some disagreement within the team as to whether they should do that or not. That is the current, let's say, prevailing wisdom on the situation, is that Shotzzy, certainly after seeing what MercuLes did at the Major, was keen to make it happen. And, well, it spent a little bit of time before it did happen. Of course, it's interesting because if that was a consideration, had OpTic been slammed at the weekend by Surge, you'd have thought, oh, no-brainer. But they slammed Surge. And effectively by doing so, solidified their spot at the World Championship. So, of course, nothing of this is confirmed yet. It's only rumors for the time being. But as I said, you know, continuously throughout the video, right, this is just OpTic stuff. This is OpTic stuff. This is what they do. But look, many OpTic fans were calling for this. It was a big discussion. I would say certainly the majority of OpTic fans, the majority of the community was very keen to see MercuLes for Skyz after the Major, and OpTic were heavily criticized when they didn't make the change. Now, whether it's going to work out in the longer term, who knows? But look, I've got to admit, and I will always say this for teams that want to take the risk, it's like, look, as much of a disaster as it's been this year for OpTic, and the fact that pretty much all of their changes have not exactly quite gone to plan in the way that they intended them to, a team that's taking something of a risk on a player who is, you know, I mean, maybe MercuLes is even proven, but he's played one tournament at the end of the day. It is a risk that they're taking to some degree. It's not like everything was sunshine and rainbows with Ghosty. Picking up a player who is effectively a rookie is not something that OpTic typically do. But look, at the end of the day, it worked out with Ghosty a couple of years ago, and MercuLes is undoubtedly one of the top options in challenges. I mean, he was before he got the chance. That's why he got the chance. He got the chance, and now he's proven that clearly a league caliber player, and probably a player that if OpTic don't sign him now, will have serious competition for in the off-season. So maybe now is the time to do it. It makes a lot of sense. Will it work? That's another question. Do I feel bad for Skyz? Sure. It's obviously a tough boat for him to be in, you know, thinking that he was probably going to be there with OpTic at Champs, but, you know, that's not how it's transpired. So, yeah, very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Do you agree with the move? Do you not? After what happened over the last few days? And what twist or turn will be next in this story? enjoy, because knowing OpTic, there's always going to be something else that happens that, well, is worth talking about. So very much interested in your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.